Someone You Should Know. A program about people you know and even more that you don't. Hosted by Stuart Sax, veteran, husband, father, and grandfather. Now, here's your host, Stuart Sax.
Well, it's another Wednesday morning, and that means another episode of Someone You Should Know. Very glad to have you with us. This is going to be one of those informative shows. You know, sometimes they're just downright comedic. Sometimes they're very, very serious. This is going to be an informative show. Might want to have a pad of paper and a pencil nearby to jot down some notes from our guest today. And we are brought to you today by our good friends over at No Sweat Experts. You know, right now is the time, we're getting into summer, that you need to have your system checked out. And in North Texas, No Sweat Experts are the people to call. I just had a neighbor. We had some storms here over the last week or two, and it knocked the power out. The power came back on, and my neighbor's air conditioning system was not working and all. He called his company, and his company said, "We are so backlogged, we can get to you in about 2 weeks." Well, folks, Texas heat, you can't wait 2 weeks for your air conditioning. I said, call No Sweat Experts. Within 4 hours, they were at his house. They had his air conditioning up and running. So that's the difference that a company like No Sweat Experts can do for you here in North Texas. Give them a call. They're good people and they're efficient. They take care of business. Well, my guest today is Rachel Oslund, and I am very, very happy to have her here. Hey, and having mentioned air conditioning, you probably know about a lot about that too, because Rachel's superpower is she is a licensed home inspector in the Maryland, the state of Maryland. Mm-hmm. And by that, can you go anywhere within the state of Maryland, and you're limited to just the state of Maryland because that's where you're licensed?
Licensed in the state of Maryland, but we also do a little bit of southern Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and then we have a license for Northern Virginia too. Well, it's all of Virginia, but we just do Northern Virginia too.
Okay. And even though she is in the Maryland area, folks, I want you to be very, very attentive from the show, because a lot of the things that Rachel's going to be talking about are things that you need to know about home inspections anywhere in the country, because there may be tweaks in different states for things that they have to look at, but a lot of it is just common knowledge that we as home buyers and sellers sometimes overlook. And that's why a licensed home inspector is who you need. And you've been doing this for a while now.
Yep. Since 2006 is when I started.
So, and have you seen since 2006 up to today, has there been a shift in some things that you've noticed have been worth taking a second look at when you're doing your inspections?
That's a great question. It's been interesting because as the prices have gone up and the amount of inventory has dropped, people have been not taking care of their houses, not fixing things before they sell, because they know people will buy the house. So just as an overarching theme, it's been watch out if you're buying a house without a home inspection. Just be prepared for maintenance, lots of maintenance items, because no one has to do those things now to sell.
So I guess one of the first red flags was that if you see a listing on a house and it says as is, you might want to ask yourself a couple of questions and say, that's worth inspecting that house if the seller is trying to unload it as is.
Yes. And as is doesn't have to mean that you're not getting a home inspection. All it means is that the seller's saying, not doing anything. Here's my house. It may be in great condition and it may not be. So you want to have someone walk through with you and give you the details of what's going on in the house.
And am I correct that there is this word, a very powerful word called disclosure, that if you do have something wrong with your house and you list it, if there has been a leak in the basement or something like that, and you've stopped the leak and you've painted over the water spots and all, but you have to disclose if there has been some issue in the house.
So that's a very interesting point because it's different in every state.
Ah,
Whether or not something has to be disclosed after it's been fixed and how long after it was fixed that it needs to be disclosed. So in some areas, you have to disclose if there was a death in the house or if there was a leaky basement that you had fixed. And in some areas, you don't. So I teach a class about meth labs and identifying meth labs in houses, and also a class on stigmatized properties. And there's no black and white. And in Maryland, it's actually buyer beware. So they don't have to disclose if they've fixed it.
so if a guy kills his wife and he buries her in the basement and all, does he have to disclose it?
Nope.
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 Oh,
Not in Maryland. Now the smell may get to the owners. They may,
right. Or if you hear noises in the middle of the night,
Mhm.
it might indicate something.
Yes, and in some states you do need to tell people if it's haunted. And in Maryland you do not.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Now, is that something that a potential buyer might say, I might consider moving to Maryland because their rules are a little less stringent than, say, Virginia?
I'm not sure if it's a rule stringency thing or if it's a buyer, please take responsibility for your happiness and satisfaction with the home purchase and living there. Because there are other rules, like things going on with the NAR settlement that are bringing up buyer agency and buyer contracts with the to be able to go and see the house with an agent, and all that documentation and those laws have already been in place for a long time here. So there are certain things that are already covered here. But boy, that take responsibility for what's going on in the house. Google the house. Google the sex offenders near the house. Google, look up the names of the past owners and Google their names. Just find out what has been happening in that area, and also talk to your neighbors or soon to be neighbors.
Yeah. So it's kind of like what you do with a Carfax for buying an automobile. You want to find out what the maintenance record has been for that house. Especially, I would assume that in your area, you are working with inspections on some very old houses.
Yes.
And all, and what you are looking for in an old house that might be 50 or 100 years or more
Mhm.
would be a lot different than if it was a new development and it's a new build. So it's going to be a little bit different set of criteria there.
Yes, every house and every generation basically is, or I should even say every decade has its own idiosyncrasies and quirks. And there are things that we deal with here that you may not deal with there, or in Florida people aren't dealing with. So it can be interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, the first home that my wife and I moved into was a 100-year-old house. Uh, and first of all, I remember the real estate agent telling us that the house had potential. I will never buy another house that they tell me has potential, because you're going to be paying for potential for the rest of the time you own the house. But that 100-year-old house, one of the first things that the real estate agent said in the inspection was, you definitely want to check the house for lead paint,
Mhm.
for asbestos, things that were common materials to use in old homes that are off the radar today. You can't use those products.
Yep, you've got it. And asbestos was a great insulator. My house was built in 1957, which is around my favorite decade of houses for myself to live in, because of the way they were built. But my house has an asbestos flue for the furnace, and it's got asbestos tiles in the basement. And you can't know if it's really asbestos till you test it, but it's nice to know if that's what it is. and you're not going to damage it to test it. A lot of houses here also have asbestos shingles on the outside of the house, which is fine as long as they're in good condition. And then lead paint is anything built 1977 or earlier has the potential to have lead-based paint in it. And lead paint is fantastic. It was used because it was so durable.
Right.
So
if I want to buy this old house, and you come out and you do an inspection and you say there is lead paint, and it's a beautifully restored house, it does have lead paint and it does have asbestos. Does that mean that I have to bring that house up to code before I can buy it? Or you can say, I've identified that it's there, but you can still buy the house with it?
That's a really, really important point that you're making, is if whatever's going on with the house, lead paint, asbestos, past meth lab, high levels of radon, mold, none of that precludes you from buying the house. The home inspection is providing the information. And it's important to keep in mind, as you found out with your 100-year-old house as your first house, everything can be fixed. It just takes time or money.
Yeah. And of course, the buyer, that's a little bit of leverage the buyer might have, is because the inspection comes back and says the house has this, this, and this. The buyer, of course, to go back and say, it's been identified as having asbestos and lead paint and everything, but I'm going to have to do something. Let's renegotiate the price of the house. And sometimes the seller will say, yeah, they don't want to spend the money to bring it up to code, today's code, and also they'll make an adjustment on the price of the house.
Yep. And a lot of times buyers will be able to get some credit back to be able to do the work. It's important for people to know that a home inspection isn't about bringing a house up to code. So what
Good point. Yeah.
The house has to be up to the current code of the last time it was significantly renovated. So my 1957 house with a 1957 kitchen, when I bought it, didn't need to have GFCI protected outlets. The outlets with the little buttons on them, didn't have to have those around the kitchen, in the kitchen, because that wasn't code at the time the house was built. And it had not been renovated at all. The house hadn't been. So code is not something to be worried about. But it can be it can get in the way if you have a family member or a friend who is an electrician or a plumber who comes in with you and says, oh, this isn't up to code. You can't get your loan. It's not a pass or fail. Here's the information.
Okay. However, if you buy the house knowing all of that and you decide, okay, I'm going to remodel that kitchen, and I'm going to take out the old backsplash, and I'm going to take out the old electrical. Now you have to put in what is currently up to code in today's world.
Correct. Because in most areas, anything other than slapping on a coat of paint requires you to get permits from your local jurisdiction. So if it's a county or a township, whatever it is, they're going to come in and inspect it. And that before you start and throughout the process, and then when you're done. So you have to you're going to be following those rules. So if you buy new construction, then things were up to the code of that the jurisdiction was following at the time the house was built. Perfect.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned new construction. If I'm buying a house, a brand new house in a subdivision, say, am I required to have the house inspected once it is completed before they hand me the keys and I move in?
Nope, it's just a really great idea. So
because you have the eyes to find out if there was something that was circumvented, that a shortcut was taken.
If a shortcut was taken, or even I like to think that the builders have the best of intentions and the subcontractors who are doing the work are human, and that they may have got a cramp in the back of their leg and hopped up while in the middle of installing the dishwasher and forgotten to complete it, or had to run their kid to a doctor's appointment and left in the middle of something and forgot to go back and do it. And the county comes and inspects, but they don't check all of the receptacles or the outlets. they're not running the water. So on the home inspection, when the very first new construction I did in 2006, they had not finished connecting the bathtub in the primary ensuite bathroom, huge soaking tub. And I was running the water, and it was pouring down through the recessed lights in the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
And also onto the mantelpiece in the dining room. I mean, it was draining down, and then down onto the floor, beautiful hardwoods, onto the electric panel in the basement. And that was brand new construction. The buyer hadn't wanted an inspection, and the agent said, you need to. And the chimney was missing the liner, which is a huge fire hazard to not have that, and carbon monoxide risk. And there were shingles missing. This was brand new construction.
Right. Well, very, very often here in Texas, very often you are buying a home that has been labeled as builder grade, which means it's not the very best wood. Maybe it's maybe not the very best of materials and all. It's just they're in a hurry to get that house finished so they can start on the next house on the block.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right that one of the things that came back on our inspection was that it looked, and we bought a 20-year-old house, was that they must have cut back on the insulation in the attic. And when, in Texas, we get a lot of days that are in triple digits.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't have adequate insulation in your attic, that's going to force your air conditioning system to work even harder to cool the house down.
Mm-hmm.
So it came back on the inspection, and we noted it and all, and so we got an allowance to have them come in and put in extra insulation into the attic area.
And that's huge to find out, especially when you're where you are with the high temperatures, and where we are, it gets hot, and we didn't have adequate insulation in our 1957 house. It's the original little bit of insulation, and that makes a huge difference. Now, if your house had an inspection when it was first built, before they put the drywall up, but the insulation was there, the home inspector could have come in and said, okay, there's not much insulation here. This isn't going to work. And been able to provide that information to the original buyers of the house. So there are multiple stages of inspections when you're buying a new construction.
Well, but in today's construction environment, am I not right that generally that you have to sign off on various things in the building process? Mm-hmm. And so once the electrical goes in, that's got to be inspected and signed off before the plumbing goes in, maybe, and then the plumbing needs to be signed off before the drywall goes in, and each of these areas has its own set of regulations to make mm-hmm. sure that everything is done before the walls are finished, which is going to hide everything behind the wall.
Right. So, and in different areas, there are different times and that during the construction process that those inspections are done. And I've just seen multiple problems on houses that they put the walls up and then they do the inspections, and you find out that there are no sprinkler heads attached to the sprinkler lines going through the attic, or the sprinkler lines don't, and by sprinkler, I mean fire suppression systems. Right. They're not going where they're supposed to go, or walls are missing plates to protect the plumbing. All the things so that you nail a hammer into the wall, you don't pierce a pipe. I mean, those are the things that you can't see when the drywall's up. And you can't count on, I just did an inspection on new construction, took off the electric panel, and a screw, they used the wrong screws to put the panel on. Instead of a blunt tipped screw, they had a pointy one. So it pierced the wire and then it arced. Brand new construction. The builder said, you aren't supposed to take off the cover to the panel. Well,
That's my job.
Yeah, and I could see why you wouldn't want me to. So
Yeah, because you took that shortcut.
Because you used the wrong screws. I mean, if the homeowner had done that, that would have scared them to death. I mean, and it startled me, but it wasn't an unexpected thing because it can happen to me anytime. But that was like, this is basic stuff. And then it had already passed the county inspection at that point.
And I think it's safe to say, and by the way, folks, while we are talking and all, you're going to see Rachel's website, lodestarinspections.com. I urge you to check it out, write it down and all, because there's a lot of valuable information that wherever you live in the country, there are points that Rachel lists on her website that you might want to make sure that you discuss with your inspector to make sure that they are covering all of these same points. I have to ask you, what prompted you to become a home inspector?
It is a very male dominated field, that is for sure. And so my dad actually bought a franchise, and he and my ex-husband were doing it. My dad inspecting and my ex-husband doing the marketing. And my dad said, Rachel, you would love this. You've got to give this a try. And I had just finished homeschooling my kids up to middle school. They went to school. And so I was ready to do something. And so I gave it a shot, and I was going to do all inspecting, but then I took over marketing because the ex-husband became the ex-business partner too, and marketer. So I took over the marketing as well and inspecting, and found that the two worked really well for me because both are education pieces. It's all about educating people and having them feel confident in what they can understand and know about houses, and then having peace of mind.
Well, there's another thought to this too, is that, and I had a female inspector in my home, and I found that very often women can kind of wiggle into areas that big guys with broad shoulders just can't get to.
That's absolutely true.
Especially if you have a house with a basement or with a crawl space underneath.
Oh my gosh.
The house.
Yes.
And I mean, you crawl under houses?
Yes. And I've made jokes that I put on weight. Putting on weight had nothing to do with menopause. It had everything to do with not wanting to be called all over the state to crawl into people's crawl spaces.
Right.
But yes, every day I face my fear of claustrophobia, of small spaces, bugs, snakes, critters, all those things, and fear of heights. I deal with all of those because
you have a fear of heights.
Mm-hmm.
And you do home inspections, so you're getting up on roofs,
yes,
and checking out chimneys.
Exactly, and that's where it was one of the things that I was most nervous about getting started with my dad was, how am I getting up on the roof? And I'll never forget the first time my dad went up on a roof and I was holding the ladder, and it was a 28-foot ladder, and it was probably the second time I used a big ladder, and he was on the roof. And I was like, oh, I can move this over to where I needed to move it. And I went over backwards with this ladder, and then I must have had abs of steel and adrenaline, because I came right back up, was like, oh my gosh. But the buyer, the agent, and my dad saw it all. And my dad was on the roof and he saw the ladder go. And then the people were in the garage watching me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So I'm 5 feet tall, so size is a challenge with some of these, with the big equipment. So now I have that under control now.
You mentioned other people there in Texas, if I'm not correct, when we had our home inspected, they just gave the inspector the key, and we were not to be present during the inspection because we weren't supposed to be there to be of any influence or bother. Does that change from state to state regulations as to whether the buyer or seller can be on site when the inspection is being done?
Yes, it's a cultural thing throughout the country and there are different pockets so it's not even statewide in some areas. It's just what works in that area is what happens. So here, since COVID, because during COVID, we didn't have people there for the home inspections, we've
Right.
really been trying to have people come for the last hour and a half instead of being there for the whole 3 hours, because we need the house to be quiet so we can listen for the running toilets. We can tap on the wall of the paneling in the basement and hear if termite tubes fall. We really need to be able to focus. And when we arrive at the property and the buyer is there at the same time, they know more about the house than we do. And they're asking us questions. And so it's frustrating for them and frustrating for us. And it's easier for them to get off work for an hour, hour and a half. But I do know of lots of places where it's not acceptable for the buyer to be there. And sometimes the seller's there and sometimes not
Well,
as
yeah.
well.
So you mentioned earlier that the average inspection is about 3 hours,
Mhm.
and that's top to bottom and everything.
Mhm.
You mentioned a word earlier, radon.
Mhm.
What is radon, and why is it important to have the house inspected for that?
So radon is everywhere. It's outside and inside the house. And it's a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas. And it is the leading cause of lung cancer death among non-smokers. And if you ever smoked, then you are more likely to have radon-induced lung cancer simply because your lungs are more vulnerable. And so the concern with radon is it gets concentrated in the lowest level of your house. The house that's touching the dirt, whether it's a slab or a crawl space, if the house touches dirt, radon can get in, and then it is in that area and concentrated. Opening windows doesn't help, and opening and closing doors doesn't help. It really just is coming from the earth.
Well, okay. So you just said it's colorless and it's odorless, and how on earth do you find out that it exists if it is colorless and odorless and all?
So interesting question, because some people have said that home inspectors made up radon to make money
Oh, okay.
because
I
you
think
can't.
that's a fair point.
I mean, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. At least with carbon monoxide, which you can't see, smell, or taste, you've got it pretty soon because you're dead.
Exactly. Yep.
But with radon, it's long-term exposure. And what happens for testing is the minimum testing time is 48 hours. And that's according to the American Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists. So ARST is what we call it. And the EPA. So there are multiple ways to test. I use a continuous radon monitor, which is actively sampling the air. And it's how many radon particles decay in a certain period of time. And then that is counted. Those are counted, and those are picocuries per liter. Like Marie Curie.
Right.
So a curie is this, a picocurie is a trillionth of a curie. Your eyes
That's
glazed over. I'm sure people who are listening to this while they're driving just drove off into a ditch.
Well, but the point is that's why people that are buying or selling a house need people like you, because we are not knowledgeable now. We just know I want to get a good price for my house when I'm selling it, or I want to get as the best price if I'm buying it.
Mhm.
But that inspection can be part of that a teeter-totter that allows you to say whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. What am I
Yeah.
going to have to invest in this house after I buy it if I don't have an adequate inspection report to go on?
Yes. And the radon testing is not part of a home inspection. It's not required in most places to have a test. There's one county in Maryland that requires it. But for most places, it's not a requirement. And it's the best problem to have with a house. Because I just gave you like the worst statistics and how awful it is. I mean,
Right.
having it at the actionable threshold is like smoking 10 cigarettes a day. So if it's at 4, you don't want to have that in your house. You want to get it down to an acceptable level of risk, which is like 2 picocuries per liter. However, it's super simple to fix because you measure it and you have a reading, and it's hourly readings. And what's that average? And here it is. This is the number. How many picocuries? Okay, it's this. Now they put in a fan with a motor on it, a pipe with a fan and a motor, and it
Ah,
pulls the radon gas from below the house out. It's easy. It's in our area, it's under $2,000. I mean, it's huge. That's such a big deal.
and every area of the country has its own issues.
Yes.
For instance, in our house, when we moved from Florida, we knew what to look for in Florida, but when we got to Texas, we weren't aware and we weren't told by the real estate agent about the different soil in Texas. And our house is on a concrete slab that is on movable soil. And within 5 years of living here, all of a sudden we realized that there was a little crack in one of the walls in the living room. We had an engineer came out and he said, the front of your house is sinking. Huh? What does that mean? Because of the soil. In Texas, you have to have a drip line around your house to have water going into the foundation to keep it moist and level. And unfortunately, many thousands of dollars later, they had to put in
Pilings.
pilings, yes, in order to lift and secure the foundation of the house. Well, you don't know that. And unfortunately, in our inspection, everything was fine at the time, but the soil shifted over the years. And that's why I think inspections, people will say, well, wait a minute, an inspection can cost a few $100s or even $1,000, and I want to pay that. You know what? You're spending, 6 digits on your home and all. And why would you not want to invest a modest amount in order to have answers? And am I correct? You provide the people with a notebook and it lists everything that was inspected. And so anytime you can go back and you can look at, what it was 10 or 15 years ago when you bought the house and what it is now in order to make some changes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's super valuable. You are spot on about when you buy a car and it's $35,000 or $40,000 and you spend $100 on an inspection, you don't complain, or
Right.
maybe you do, but that's what that is. When you buy a little 2-seater airplane to fly yourself, that inspection is going to be about $3,000. When you buy $3,000 to $5,000, when you buy your $800,000 house and you think it should be $400 for an inspection, it doesn't make sense because of how much money you could save with what you get from your inspections. That information, had the soil been shifting in that house and that crack been visible, perhaps the engineer would have come out at that time and you would have saved all of that money or chosen not to buy the house. And
Exactly.
And part of what we do, I'm one of 4 inspectors in Maryland that's certified to provide advanced structural assessments. So I work with a structural engineering firm to, during the home inspection, identify any areas and that may be shifting or not right, or just do it because of the age of the house and take measurements of all the floors to see what's level so that we can actually see, is the front of your house sinking, or is there something wrong with the subfloor and they put it in wonky and your floors are wobbly? Those are all things that save huge amounts of money.
So I'm going to do a 180-degree shift here.
Okay.
Because when you're not crawling up on roofs or underneath the countertops looking for leaks and looking for radon and all that kind of good stuff, I understand that you like to stand in front of a microphone and do stand-up comedy and even improv comedy.
Yes.
And did that come before you went into home inspections? You've always been, performance inclined, or is that something that came in after in order to say, I got to do something other than climb up on roofs?
It was always a thing I was always interested in it. And my George Burns and Jonathan Winters were my heroes. And I thought they were amazing. And then I grew up and kind of grew out of the wanting to be an old white dude with a cigar phase, and and did other things, and had kids and other things, and didn't think about it. And then I came across a class. Well, then I started teaching classes for realtors in about 2007. And apparently I was delivering information in a way that they found funny and interesting and engaging. And
on a rather dry subject to begin with.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. Mold can be a little stuffy. It's all of it. So from there, I got started and it was terrifying. And then it was like going home. It was just the coolest, neatest thing.
Yeah. I want you to tell, because you are part of an improv group that is appropriately called BIG, BIG, which stands for
Baltimore Improv Group.
It's a great handle, a great thing to promote too. And in our earlier discussion when we first met, I told you that I've taken improv classes too here in North Texas, and we've also got a very it's a clean improv group, and all very, very family friendly, based on improv practices and all, and kind of mirrors the Second City type image from Chicago, and improv. And I've always been an extrovert anyway too, and so it worked for me. But some of the people that were in my improv classes were very much introverts, and they found that improv allowed them to be able to speak, off the cuff very quickly and all in front of an audience, and it brought a lot of these people out of their shells. I don't sense that you ever had a problem with that.
I did actually have a problem. When I was a kid, I started a theater group at my school. The first production was Little Red and Her Riding Hoods. And that was fun. And that was like third grade. But I've always been shy. And then doing theater kind of opened things up for me. And then realizing how much value I could get, that I got from everything I do is improv in the field with clients. So when I'm explaining things about a house, so when I realized that I could do that for fun in the evening, and I could just go and make stuff up, but based on what you said, and just have a ball with it, it was like honing my skills. I think though, anybody who wants to be able to connect better with people should take an improv class, even just a level 1 improv class, just the connecting with another person. Because there were a lot of people in my class who were very shy and then came out of their shells by the end. And those are some great relationships.
Now, you also do stand-up comedy, and very often people think it's the same thing. It isn't, because stand-up, you prepare in front of a mirror, and you have to remember your routine, and you have to pace yourself. Whereas improv, a suggestion comes out of the audience, and you've just got to use your God-given talent to come up and act out in the moment what was a suggestion from the audience. So did your stand-up comedy come first, or did the improv come first?
The improv came first. And the stand-up comedy was always there in the background. And when I was doing the improv, the Big had a class for stand-up comedy. And it was like a 9-week thing every Sunday afternoon. And you would have to perform. And it was working on actually creating with creating bits and being able to do that, and getting stage presence and connecting with producers around at different clubs around the area. And so it was all of that. So the improv was great, but then boy, that the stand-up stuff I just loved that.
Do you get a lot of material from your home inspections to use in your stand-up routines?
Yes.
I would think so.
One of the things that I tell people is, and I can't say this to everyone, but I'll say it here because I feel like you'll get this. And your listeners will get this, the humor behind it. People ask what happens on a home inspection. Like, what do you do? And because the appraiser does the dollar value on a house, what does a home inspector do? I thought they were the same thing. No, I identify defects for a living. That may be why my first marriage didn't work out. I don't know.
Okay. You didn't identify the defects before you purchased the house.
No, it took me 15 years. That would have been a long home inspection.
or in your career, that was a slow leak.
That was a slow leak. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. So there's a lot of from my marriage, my first marriage. There's a lot from my second marriage, because that's where I am right now. There's a lot from parenting. I've got 2 sons. One is a wildland firefighter and one was a Marine. And so I have,
all material.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Everything. And I live in Baltimore City, and I love it here. We're on the edge of the woods, and the woods where we live, because I'm not a city person, the woods where we live, no murders happen there. That's where they find the bodies, but but they dump them there. And so people are like, you walk in those woods? Yeah, they're perfectly safe.
Yeah.
They dump them
just
there.
Look for areas where there's lots of flowers growing.
Oh my gosh. Yes. This looks very well fertilized.
Yes. But just in this one area that's about 3 feet wide and 6 feet long.
Exactly. When the dogs are going bonkers, I don't know what the deal is. But the podcast Serial? The Serial, Serial? That podcast was about a murder, and the body was dumped in these woods. Which is so that podcast Serial which was several years ago, was but the trial is still going on. Keep getting appeal after appeal, but this was like 10 or 15 years ago.
Oh wow.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Rachel, I can't tell you how much fun it's been just having this conversation with you. I mean, both the serious side of your life and the funny side of your life too. And certainly I think it makes you the person that you are because you have this blend of both. And again, folks, the website lonestarinspections.com, a lot of valuable information. Check it out, because you might just get some tips wherever you're living. And also, if you have any questions about stand-up comedy or improv, and I'll reach out to Rachel and ask her about that too. And I agree with you, Rachel, 100%. If you have an improv company that offers level 1, level 2 classes and all, it's money well spent to do it, because you'll have a lot of fun and you'll learn a lot about yourself.
Yes. And you all the connecting that you do with people, it just brings you into a greater comfort level. And it also reveals to you that we're all in the same boat, that most people have the same insecurities. Some of us just handle them differently.
That you're absolutely right. Well, that'll do it for another episode of Someone You Should Know. I always end my show by saying, be yourself, because everyone else is already taken. And I think Rachel certainly will understand that quote. And I urge you to go out and make it a really good day, and join us again next week. And thank you again to Someone You Should Know, Rachel Oslund.
Thanks for having me. Great to meet you, Stuart.
Someone You Should Know.